Welcome back to Meet Bridget. We are back again this week for another one-on-one episode. Keshiia and I have been doing these conversational episodes at the request of our audience. We did a two-part episode recently on body image, which was a lot of fun. And this week is part 2 on motherhood. Last week we started with an episode on motherhood. The conversation was pretty free-flowing, but we got into some experiences around conceiving. We talked a little bit about miscarriage and pregnancy loss. We got a little bit, I think incidentally, we talked a lot about our own experiences of mothering babies and young children and just some of those perceptions. And this week, we wanted to dive back into our conversation. When we left off last week, we were talking a little bit about balance as a mom. And when you're a mom, you're also simultaneously a lot of other things. So to jump back in, here we go.
Being a mom, you have to wear so many hats. Being a stay-at-home mom is a full-time job, if not more, in and of
Yeah.
itself. I still, like, I think about my grandmother having 8 kids and my mom having 4 kids. It's just having one is a lot. You're responsible for a whole human life, and then you add more children to the mix, and it just, becomes that much more challenging. So, how has motherhood really changed for you? You have Eden, who's going on 3 years old this summer, and now you have beautiful baby girl Nina, who's 10 months. How was that transition from being mommy to single little girl to having 2 babies?
I think it's one of those things that you just don't really. I'm the kind of person that I really anticipate things a lot, and it's something I have to work on, just being a little bit more present and not being so much like, well, what is this going to be like? Well, what is this going to be like? And then
Yeah.
analyzing the 10 different ways things could go before life actually just unfolds for me. But anyways, I think I went through a very big transition when Eden arrived. Obviously, you know my heart like tripled in size just meeting her, and the experience is just like more wonderful than anything I could imagine. But I also, which we can get into, had a kind of traumatic, not birth, but like after birth
Hmm.
experience that I think led to some postpartum anxiety for me. But in general, I do think that it was a big transition. Like, I had never in my life considered being a stay-at-home mom until I had Eden. And, with some of that anxiety, I also had some, you know, not, I wouldn't call it like OCD, but I just had a lot of, I wanted to control how she was raised. And I had a bit of a hard time like delegating any childcare to anyone except myself. So there was definitely a lot of resistance and anxiety to like letting anyone help me, which was hard. And so part of me was like, okay, maybe I should be a stay-at-home mom because I can't think of anyone else taking care of her. But then, for several months when I was just with her day in and day out, and I was still working on Bridget and some things that I could do from home, but my husband would come home and he was like, "You look like a starved animal." He's like, "You look miserable." And he's like, and I get home and I'm tired after a long day and you just like going a mile a minute, like asking me questions, like interrogating me about my day. And he's like, "You just seemed like so desperate for interaction with other adults."
Hmm.
So part of me had to like look in the mirror and be like, okay, there are moms that thrive as stay-at-home moms, and I have so much respect for them. But I'm like, I have to, out of respect for myself, know that I'm a person that needs accomplishment and interaction outside of my home in order to make me a better mom to my
Yeah.
daughter. So going through that, I also realized I was like, I don't want to be completely away from the home. And like, if I can try to come up with this like hybrid model where I can be here a lot, work remotely, which is extremely difficult. I was like, but this is what I need to just find my groove that works for me. And then I got pregnant again, after Eden turned like, just around the time that she turned 1. And I remember my first fear being pregnant again. I was like, there's no way I'm going to love another child as much as I love my first. I'm like, now I feel kind of guilty for being pregnant again because like this child isn't going to be as loved as my first. And
That's
my
actually
mom,
my fear right now.
yeah,
everyone asks, they're like, "When are you guys having another baby?" And I'm like, I am so obsessed with Jude right now that I can't imagine splitting like I need at least another 2, 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
And
know.
I mean, I think too, like the timing, I think that's totally fair to also feel that and take that time.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I definitely remember feeling that way. And I was like, oh man, I feel bad. I feel bad for the second baby. And I'm like, and I am a second daughter. I'm like, oh, maybe like, oh man, this is so complicated. But then, my mom always told me when I would ask, like, which child do you love the most? She was like, no, it's like you have one child and your heart, like, she's like, when you get married, you think that you could never love another person so much. It's like the best day, hopefully, and you just,
Mhm.
it's like, we were talking about this actually recently, you and I, on another phone call, but we're like, just like, when you get married, you just think the whole world revolves around you and your love. And it's the most significant thing that's ever hit the planet. And like, nothing matters as much as your love, and
To
it's
everyone,
true.
to
It's true
everyone.
to everyone. I'm like, to you, like, yes, it does. But like, I really think I probably was kind of like that, but I was just like, you
You
know,
were very gracious, by the way, but I totally can relate where you're like, nothing matters more.
nothing matters more. It just was so revolutionary for me. Shout out, Andrew. Love you. Um, then you have a child, and it's like your world grows again. And it's even more significant because it adds to the love of your partner because it's like we've created life together. So it's like that first love that I thought could never be changed in any way was actually enhanced by this additional love that's been added. And I think that it was very similar when I had my second daughter, where it was like, not only did this new life not take away from either of these people's love that, is in my life, my heart grew for that person and it enhanced the love of these other two people because now I get to
Mhm.
see, my first daughter interacting with my second daughter. And that is its own like huge magical thing. I'm like, these two people that I made are like loving each other.
I know.
It's crazy. So I think that,
I
that's
kind of feel like the Grinch when like his heart starts growing. Like
yes, that's
it's
me.
like increases in size.
It's me to cringe. I understood that this early, like when my mom would always say that I can't explain it in any other way except that your heart just grows so immensely. But at the same time, I mean, being a mom of two now and realizing it is like it's so much work in our house. Like we're exhausted. My head doesn't hit the pillow, and maybe it's because they're very young right now. But like my husband and I talk, I'm like, how could you ever have more than two of them? I'm like, how? How do you keep them alive? I'm like, our house is like being destroyed, like
It's like
just
booby
by
traps.
yes. And I think my kids are like great. I think they're great
Yeah.
little people. So I'm like, they're not like bad kids or something. I don't know. I just we are at our capacity in terms of energy, but it's also so life giving. Like they do one thing. Like Eden has started saying "I love you" in a way that's like
Oh,
really proclamatory. Like she just like really says she goes like "I love you," and I'm like, oh, what? So I give these little gifts of their life. It is just really is so enhancing in the same
I
in more
know.
measure actually than it is hard
Well,
work.
I told you this off camera, but Jude said mama this morning for the first time. Like we were like in bed as a family and he was like trying to get my attention and lately all he's been saying is da 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 da, which I guess is easier to say than mama.
Yeah,
But then like all of a sudden he's like mama and I was like, "Oh,
I know.
what is this new level of heaven?"
It's
Like
the
what?
best. You're like, I feel
Like
seen.
like I'm mama?
Dude, thank you for
Like
holding space for me.
yes. You see me?
You see me? That is me. Mama is me. And they're like,
I
what?
know. In contrast, I think of like all the times when I was a kid and I was just like going through like a temper tantrum or like just being, I wasn't like a particularly bad kid, but we all have those moments where I'm like,
Yeah,
oh God, I wish I could have like disciplined myself. And I'm like, oh, one day he's going to say something that's just going to break my heart. And
I
he's not
know.
going to mean it, but you're going to be like, oh, this is what it is to
I
be a
know.
mom.
I know. Just like that. I think my sister Archana explained it as she was like, my heart feels like an overripe fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And I like just like swollen and almost a little sick,
Mm-hmm.
but just so sweet, like almost too sweet all the
Mm-hmm.
time and heavy in a way where it's just this thing that you're carrying around that it's just so big. And I was like, oh, I think that's just like such a good descriptor for how it
Yeah.
feels sometimes. It's just like so full. But I do think that in terms of, you asked a question about the identity of becoming like a
Mhm.
mama one and then a mama two. I won't lie, it has definitely been like a transition in understanding my own, like my separate identity outside of motherhood is still important to me. When you get pregnant, you don't really realize like it's like your whole life does change. It really does. Like you go from living for yourself and your people and your friends and whatever, and like it's just like you're in a box. And then it's like when you have kids, it's like they come first. Like it's
Mhm.
instinct in most ways that I feel like I really have to make so much more of an effort. Like I have to be so much more mindful about like having my own career, my own friendships, like my romantic relationship. Like takes work. It's not just this like spontaneous like thing that happens so easy anymore. It's just like it takes so much mindfulness to really exist in these other spheres when you are so immersed in motherhood.
Yeah, you almost have to schedule time for yourself, which sounds crazy, but you really do because you get so involved in the day to day. As parents, like you want to do right by your children. You want to make sure you're establishing the routine and you're creating the schedule and like bedtime and waking up and meals and is he eating the right foods and am I giving him the right kind of stimulation? It's very easy to get lost in that jumble, especially, I mean, just period. And then, add work on top of it. I think you and I both have very like high demand, like day jobs for lack of a better word. And then we have Bridget, which is our like job that we love and we keep showing up for. But it's a lot. You have to like really make sure that we're like scheduling the time for it, that we're putting it on the calendar. And then it's like in between that, you're picking and choosing moments. Like, okay, well, this is going to be the time for myself in the morning. And this is going to be like the time. And sometimes it's like just a few minutes.
Yeah. It's like I literally set my alarm a few minutes so I can get like the first third of my
Yeah.
coffee in my system before a
Yeah.
child is attached to my body.
Yeah. Or it's like, I'll feed Jude and then like I'll be like, okay, Cab, take him for like 15 minutes. And like I'll get like 15 minutes being in bed.
Yeah.
But it's like taking the time to schedule those things. I've heard a lot of people talk about, motherhood being like their purpose or giving them purpose. And while I love that idea, I also feel like there's more to it. It's innately like you, Asha, like have lived like a rich life and you have your career, you have everything that you've worked so hard for, your education, like your friends. Similarly, like I have the same thing. And when I think about who I was before I became a mom and who I am now, I like to think of it as, my son adds a new level to all of that.
Mhm.
He doesn't necessarily give me purpose in that like I didn't have purpose before, but he's created a new sense of purpose. He's created a new level of like being, like a new way for me to level up and like expand my potential, because now I have the potential to do all the things I used to do, but I also have, this child that I get to impart all of these things onto and also experience life with, which is really
Yeah.
exciting.
I literally took Eden and Nina out for a walk this morning just because keeping them in the stroller meant that they weren't attacking each other. This morning was very energetic for my kids, and I was like, let's get out of the house. And thank goodness, because it was right when the garbage truck was coming down the street. And I was like, Eden's never seen the garbage truck before. I'm like, Eden, I'm going to show you where the garbage goes. So I like took her over real dramatic and then like, look, I'm like the truck takes the garbage can where we put our garbage bag and it lifts it with this little claw and up it goes and it's empty now. And like, it was so great because like I was kind of having fun, but her eyes, like watching her eyes, see how this works for the first time. I'm like, this is the best. This is the best because it's almost like I get to rewind and experience childhood that like these moments that I've, forgotten at this point, just
Yeah.
like seeing the world through a child's eyes, really like it's like an injection of youth, if
Gleeful.
you let it be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that it's almost like you were saying, it's like you have life on two axes or whatever before you have
Mhm.
kids, and then you have a child, and it almost adds another axis in there where it's like you can see it in one direction and the reverse, by how they see it too. It's wild. I mean, there are sacrifices. Like things are never as simple as they
Mhm.
were. Like when it comes to like planning, I have found that it's like I deliberately have to make time for the things that fuel me and make me feel good, and then in turn make me a better mom. It's like
Mhm.
it literally takes scheduling. And like I'm used to like scheduling, work and sometimes like workouts and stuff. I've been
Exercise,
pretty
yeah.
good at like scheduling exercise, but like now I gotta like schedule like I've been feeling real anxious and like I need a walk. A
Mhm.
walk needs to be scheduled in here because I know that really is an effective way for me to feel pretty good and to turn my day around, and some sunshine and steps aren't bad either, or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Or like a
Movement.
date night with
Mhm.
my husband, like we need to just put it on the calendar and like allow for it and plan ahead for it and make sure there's childcare or whatever, because this is something that makes us feel good and that makes us better parents too. As an effect, I think that none of those things happen just by accident anymore, very as
Yeah.
often as they need to.
Which I actually just realized that Kevin and I haven't gone on a date since the night before Jude was born.
Hey, we need to go on a date night.
Like we've gone out,
Yeah.
but not just like the two of us together.
Yeah.
Gotta text him.
Yeah. We can make it happen. Leave Jude here. I'll watch him.
Okay.
It's already a chaos over here. I'll take him. You might not ever get him back, but I'll take him.
It'd be really cute to see what the girls did with him. Which, by the way, we did take the kids to the Long Beach Aquarium, and when Nina and Jude saw each other, Nina grabbed his face, and it was like love at first sight.
My girls are very, maybe this is something we were talking about. Like they're always watching you, right? Like I'm a
Yeah.
pretty affectionate person, you know. And Eden was like this too, but like when she would see Jack, her little cousin, she'd go up and just like kiss him on the face. And I'm like, well, like we'll have to teach boundaries and stuff a little bit, but I'm like,
Conversely, there was a time where Jack did not like that.
no, he just gonna stand there. I'm like, all right, we gotta learn like a little feedback. We gotta build feedback.
He's
I'm like,
so sweet. He's so sweet.
just confused by her. But I'm like, big love. Both my girls have like very big,
Yeah.
open, trusting love. So that'll
It's
be
going to
its
be
own
fun
treat.
to watch them grow up. I mean, it's kind of wild. Like, so Jude's going on 8 months, and like in a month, he'll be out in the world for longer than he was in my belly.
Yeah.
And I'm like big time reminiscing right now on what it was like to be pregnant. And I almost feel like there's parts of it that I can't like viscerally remember, right? Like you
Yeah.
like mentally remember going through it. But I'm like, like, what did that feel like? I miss that feeling. What was your favorite part of pregnancy?
Hands down, the feeling of kicks. Like feeling movement in my belly just felt so amazing. Like I remember the first time Eden's placenta was like, I think they call it anterior. It was on the outside, which meant that it was
Mhm.
kind of like closer to like my belly button. So the placenta like attaches to a wall, for those of you who haven't gone through pregnancy, attaches to your uterine wall somewhere. And if it's towards the front, it can sometimes like block the sensation of kicks. The baby's still kicking, but like you might not feel it as much or until later in the pregnancy. So,
Mhm.
anyways, I was waiting for a feeling of a kick. And Andrew was like, we were just hanging out one night and he was like laying kind of on my belly. And she kicked and he felt it on his cheek. And I just remember the feeling of feeling both of them on both sides of my body. And it was like, whoa, like, yeah. And I was like the between, they
The
felt each other.
conduit for like
Yeah. It
my
just
two
was like,
loved ones.
I was overwhelmed. I just started bawling. I couldn't
Oh.
process the emotion. It was so overwhelmingly wonderful. So yeah, I would definitely say like the kicks. And there were also moments where I think I didn't inherently feel sexy pregnant,
Mhm.
but I did feel like when I was like in a swimsuit and stuff, I'm like at a certain point, like you physically can't suck in. And I thought it was pretty liberating to just kind of feel like, this is my pregnant form, like there's a
Mhm.
child in my body right now. And that felt really
Mhm.
like beautiful at times to me.
Yeah, I wasn't
What
going to
about
do a
you?
maternity shoot, but I'm so glad I ended up doing one
Hmm.
with one of our dear friends, Leah, who's an incredible photographer. But I remember like same thing. I mean, you feel so larger than life and you've got like first of all for me there were like moments of massive anxiety where I'm like I hope this is going okay and I'd have to like really talk to myself and like meditate and be like my body's going to do what it needs to do and also my baby is going to do
Hmm.
what it needs to do. I have to trust that this like little life that's forming inside me, this potential for life and then this little life, like that it's going to do what it needs to do to get here. And he did. And so in that way it was a very spiritual experience for me as his motherhood, you know, been. Is that grammatically correct? I don't know. It's late.
It
but
doesn't matter.
but yeah, and you just feel so big and it's really not I felt like it wasn't until the moments where like your baby like makes themselves really known. They're like moving around and tumbling that you're like, "Oh my God, this is so wild." Or like you hear the heartbeat and you're like, "This is, I'm doing something with my body."
Mhm.
And that feels so surreal. And I'm glad that I got to like enshrine it because the way that Leah pictured it was the way she evoked the sense of like peace and tranquility that I felt internally when I could feel my baby externally in a way
Yeah,
that I could memorialize it forever. Because the whole experience wasn't like that, but like being
no.
able to see it, I'm like, man, that was like the beautiful part.
Yeah, I think that you and I kind of related in the sense that like pregnancy wasn't all perfect and it wasn't all horrible. Like you sometimes
Mhm.
get glimpses. It's like, oh, there's either the pregnant girl that hate being pregnant or the ones that
Mhm.
love being pregnant, and there's no in between. I'm like, I think that it was all at once, and
Mhm.
and like both of us, honestly, almost every pregnant person I've talked to has some discomfort about
Mhm.
something, whether it's like your kind of standard like around ligament pain or just like the feeling of heaviness or tiredness
Yeah.
or nausea or whatever it is. Most people have something or back pain
Or
or
just even the fear,
the
can be
fear, yeah,
very
emotional
scary.
stuff. Yeah, everyone, I think,
Not
has
feeling sexy.
something in their pregnancy that is really difficult. And I think it's hard because externally, like whenever I see a pregnant person, I'm like, it's beautiful. Like
Mhm.
especially now having gone through it, I'm like, wow, like I think pregnancy is so beautiful externally. But I remember the feeling while you're pregnant, like I felt hyper aware all the time. I also like, I just feel like I had this whole separate reality that like I couldn't really like, communicate exactly how I was feeling in any moment to like people who were pregnant. And you're like in this
Mhm.
scenario, I'm like, I was somewhere and like someone was smoking a cigarette, and I was just like, I can't be here right now. I can't be here right now because I'm like, there's
Yeah.
smoke in here. And I'm like, I can't because my baby. I'm like, I need to get out of the
Oh
situation. It
man,
smells,
remember
you
when we were
know?
in New Orleans and it was like
Yeah.
there were like 30 cigarette smokers everywhere.
And I was literally like, I have to walk so fast. I'm like, there was something in my body. I was like, I can't be here. And it's like,
We
you
literally
just,
ran away
we
from our group. Like
ran.
we ran down the
Yes.
street and they were like, you could have just like walked 5 extra feet and you would have been fine.
No,
We're
we
like,
both had the same
no.
kind of crazy. But I think it was like something kicks in when you're pregnant, especially like they always say like pregnant women's like intuition is like,
Mhm.
stronger. And I really believe in that. And I'm like, when you think about it, even just scientifically, if you're leaving all the woo woo behind, it's like, well, like you have two beating hearts in your body at that time. Like
Mhm.
you have two brains. Like you're working on overdrive. You have what is that like double the blood in your body or
Mhm.
something like you are elevated in all senses, and it's like that's why a lot of like if you have pre-existing inflammatory conditions that can be exacerbated by
Mhm.
pregnancy, sometimes like someone will get eczema and different things. Like I had this weird thing. So back when I was working in investment management, I had shingles at one point, which is brought on by like stress. So I had this weird like shingles around my back that was awful. And but then it went away. This was far before it was like actually I had it when Andrew and I first started dating, and then it went away. When I'm pregnant, because I had shingles in my upper right like rib around that area, it exists in your system forever where it was.
Mhm.
But it just kind of lays
Yeah, it
dormant.
lives in the nerve root.
Yes. So when I'm pregnant and that area is stretched and expanded, I get what they call it post-herpetic neuralgia, which is extreme nerve pain all in my like right
Yeah.
rib cage. Pretty much it begins in the second trimester and lasts until the baby's born.
Yeah, because you're basically like having all the pain of shingles, which is
Yeah.
incredibly painful.
Yeah. Pretty much every day.
Oh,
And that to me, I was like, man, if I didn't have this, like I would really be enjoying this a lot more. But there were moments of like having to cancel plans and like crying in my bed because of this
yeah,
like intense nerve pain. I mean, looking back on it, I'm like, well, like it was worth every second for like being able to have my daughters.
I
But
know.
like you never really know what someone's kind of like going through
Nina's such a
when they're
dream.
pregnant. Yeah, I know. And it was like it got even worse the second time around. I was literally like, I mean, we had moments in
I didn't
New
even
Orleans.
realize that you had that with Edie.
Yeah, well,
But
it's
it was very
crazy.
apparent. It was very apparent when you had Nina, because I mean, we shared a room in New Orleans, and I remember there was one night where you just, it took you out.
Yeah. I was just like so, I mean, it was intense. But I mean, I think that with a lot of pregnant women, there's all sorts of I think with anyone, honestly, it's like you never know what someone's kind of enduring and where it comes from
Yeah.
and what they're maybe kind of like managing without telling everybody in the world about it. Like I shared that with a select few that I had energy to even talk about it with.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
was something that like even my doctor, when I first was like, I have this like incredible pain. I'm like, I have a pretty high pain tolerance, but this is like mind numbing, like completely it's taking over everything kind of pain. And it took really like an acupuncturist to bring up like to ask me if I had ever had shingles, and then we kind of backed
So
into it, and then
wild.
my doctors like validated like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, so that was like one thing that was kind of part of my pregnancies. With when I look at my pregnancies, I was like, I worked out my whole pregnancies. Even one,
Yeah.
the first one was during COVID, and I still felt like I had this very kind of like it was a stressful time to be pregnant during COVID because there were all these
Mm-hmm.
questions about like how COVID could affect pregnant women. I remember just going through that whole roller coaster. However, like my lifestyle while I was pregnant during COVID, I was walking every day. Like I wasn't missing out on anything, because I was pregnant because no one was doing anything. It was just like a very kind of quiet, introspective
Mm-hmm.
time, which I felt like was cool in its own way. So
Pregnancy is a beautiful thing,
it is.
but it's hard.
Also, you get like that, but you get like the pregnancy brain, which then
Oh,
turns into
yeah.
like mom brain.
But that's a real physiological thing. Like when you're
Yeah.
pregnant, your brain expands to accommodate all of the extra fluid volume. And so your neurons are actually firing a longer distance, which is
Yes.
why they say when you have pregnancy brain, it's like an actual real thing. And then your
Yeah.
brain shrinks back down to its normal size, but then your neurons are all jumbled. And then you're also like, your brain changes in the sense that like you have all of these new senses. So it's like you become very, very animal again, in that like you become like a tiger mom in a
Kind
sense,
of
but like in like the visceral animal sense, where like you can hear better, smell better, see farther because like your baby depends on it,
so
which is
beautiful.
just
You
so
kind of think
wild.
about it.
Yeah.
And to like
So,
experience that and be like, oh yeah, no, like I could totally like you can smell everything, you can hear it. Like even now, I'm like
mhm.
I'm at this point, 10 months postpartum with Nina. I can hear every little noise she
Mhm.
makes in her little
Mhm.
crib in her room, which is down the hall, with the door shut
Yeah.
with the sound machine on. And
Yep.
it's like, how am I even hearing that? Like I used to be like a really heavy sleeper. I'm like, no, but now I just have this
Yep.
awareness.
Never again. Like
Yeah,
you just wake up. I wake up so much during the
I
night, but
know.
and I don't even feel unrested. It's just you naturally do it.
Yes, awareness.
It's so
It's
different.
so amazing. Well, I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about, I don't know, a lot of people I love hearing about people's birth stories,
Hmm.
you know, and they can be beautiful. I also would like to preface anyone who is very pregnant right now, maybe close to birth, if you'd like to, or if complications or any details around birth would be anxiety inducing for you, this would be a good time to go ahead, pause, or skip over this part of the episode. Cool. So, both of us had beautiful births that resulted in healthy children, but every birth story is like unique. So, I think that it's, sometimes interesting that people are always curious, like, how did it go down? And I actually haven't shared either birth story in detail publicly at all, apart from, within my actual friend groups. So this will be a fun place to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You want?
Yeah, let's talk about Edie. Edie was
Okay.
baby number 1. I mean,
Yeah.
she was our pandemic baby. We celebrated her with like a little Zoom
Yeah.
shower. I didn't even get to go to Edie's shower actually.
No, we had like a ED shower was like a drive-by shower
Yeah.
back when we were doing that and we were like wearing masks. It was
Yeah.
dark.
So wild.
But yeah, Edie was my special little girl. Actually, fun fact, when Edie was baptized, her saint name is Bridget, Saint Bridget of Ireland.
Oh.
Fun fact. She turned like bath water into beer. Another fun fact. Yeah, look up St. Bridget. She's cool. Anyways, so Edie was like a pandemic baby. At the time that she was born, I was allowed to have my husband in the hospital with me. And they had just allowed like a doula to come with you if you wanted. I did like hypnobirthing classes and stuff because I was like, well, maybe I can like I don't know what it feels like to give birth. So I'm like, maybe I can try to do it unmedicated. Like, I want to be able to know what that is, what that strategy would be. And then when I'm in it, I can kind of see what I want to do, and just, I just want to kind of take it day by day, which for me, I think I'm very proud of that approach to both of my births, just being like, I'm just going to take it as it comes because
Mhm.
that is not in my nature. It's something I'm working towards, but to be just in the moment and being like, I'm going to trust myself to make the decisions that I need to in that experience. So Eden's birth, both of my births actually were kind of rare in that they both started spontaneously with my water breaking.
Mhm.
And what was amazing was I was listening as part of like the hypnobirthing stuff. I was listening to these meditation tracks to help me fall asleep at night. And my husband and I would actually listen to them together, but they were kind of meditations about birth and your baby coming to you and accepting, birth in quite like confidence and calm. And they're beautiful. Then they really helped us
Mhm.
fall asleep. So the night before I went into labor, I had an induction scheduled for a variety of reasons, but I had an induction scheduled, but I had moved it by 2 days because I just had this overwhelming sense. I was like, I need to give her a little bit more time. My doctor was like, well, your blood pressure is a little bit high for your normal. Like, I'm a person that has like very low blood pressure normally. So it was kind of difficult to see that my blood pressure was kind of spiking because it was actually still in normal range for
Mhm.
most people. I was like, I need to give this baby a little bit more time. So, anyways, you rescheduled the induction, and Andrew and I went for this like long, like, I don't know, I think like 6, 7 mile hike that day, which walk around the neighborhood because I just felt like it. And then we went out to dinner and I was feeling so much more peaceful now that we'd like moved the induction and we had this wonderful romantic dinner. And then we did the meditation when we were going to sleep. And the one that we did was like, as the husband and the wife, like, put your hands on the belly and like basically like breathe love to the baby and tell them that like they can come in their own time. And that's how I fell asleep with like Andrew's hand and my hand on my belly and just telling her that like she's loved and she's safe and she can come when she's ready. And that night at 2 a.m., my water broke like a water balloon. Literally, like I got up out of bed and like stood up out of bed. And it was like in the movies. I was very much expecting like, oh, your water doesn't really break often. They usually break it in the hospital or it breaks later or something.
Mhm.
But it was so I thought I had to pee. I stood up and it was like splash to the point where it like woke Andrew up. And I was like, okay, I don't think that was peeing myself. So I think this is for getting going here. So I like got in the shower and within a couple of minutes, my contractions were already like 5 minutes apart and then like 3 minutes apart. So Andrew was a little nervous and he's like, I think we should just go to the hospital because a woman that I had hired to be my doula kind of like double booked me, unfortunately.
Mhm.
I don't think it was intentional, but she wasn't available that night. And my plan was like to labor at home for a long time and then just like go to the hospital, like have the baby. Then we're like, okay, well, we don't have the doula. And Andrew's like, I don't want to stay here. He's like, you're literally having like contractions like one after another. So we went to the hospital and yeah, my labor just like ramped up really fast and furious. And I did end up getting an epidural about 8 hours in because I was throwing up from the pain levels. It was just like I was having double contractions because of the shape of my uterus and stuff. Anyways, so I was throwing up from the pain and just got like really, really exhausted. And about 8 hours in, so I did decide to get the epidural and fell asleep for about an hour, woke up and was like fully dilated and pushed for like a couple minutes, and my baby was there. So I do realize I'm like that was a special and pretty seamless, like it really
Mhm.
difficult
Mhm.
still experience of birth. So I was very grateful for that and like over the moon, happy with our baby. And she was healthy and everything was going well, But a couple days after we brought her home, they kept me in the hospital because my heart rate like got really low. So they kept us like there for 2 days. But everything with the baby was seeming fine. And I seemed like okay. So I got home, and then a couple days after, I started having like a trigger warning for anyone who's experienced
Yeah.
postpartum hemorrhaging. I know that it can be kind of traumatic from firsthand experience. So again, this is what I'm going into. I started having some hemorrhaging, but it was like slow in the beginning and then it got worse. And I was so focused on the baby that it was sort of like this other thing that I'm like, is this normal? Is this normal? Like maybe this is normal and I should just overlook it.
Mhm.
And different doctors were on call because it was still sort of like COVID time. And then one doctor was like, you need to go into the ER if it's that bad. So it's like a couple days after we brought our baby home, we pack her up and we go to the ER in the middle of the night. And they let me bring my husband and my baby back there to make an exception because I'm like, I'm actively breastfeeding and like, this is like a lot going on. So Andrew like stays the whole night sitting in like the chair in the ER. We're like feeding the baby while I have like IVs in and stuff.
Mhm.
They don't really like come up with like anything. Like a OB on call comes and sees me and like ends up telling us to like we stayed in the ER for several hours and then it kind of like the bleeding sort of naturally just like calmed down a little bit. And she's like, well, why don't you go home at 6 in the morning and then go in and get like an ultrasound? So we go home. I go into the office the next day, get an ultrasound, and they're like, oh, I don't think there's any placenta left over in your uterine wall, which can sometimes cause hemorrhaging. But like,
Mhm.
let's do a DNC anyways to like just clear out the clotting. So I went in for a DNC procedure, which for those of you that have not heard that, I can't remember what it stands for. It's you
Oh,
probably know this.
dissection and courage.
Yes.
They go in and they basically like till the uterus, till the uterine walls. They use it for abortion and also like if there's uterine tissue still in there to
Yeah.
take it out. Mhm.
Yeah. So I went in for that, which was like kind of crazy feeling with my baby at home and everything. And I was trying to like still pump and send milk home, and Andrew was gonna be home with the baby for a little while. So I had that. Then I came home and that night it had kind of stopped. But after it sort of stopped that night, started up again even stronger. And there was at one point I stood up to like use the restroom and I felt super faint. I asked my husband to like come and stand by me to help me like walk me to the restroom, and I passed out and had some like massive hemorrhaging to the extent that he had to call an ambulance to take me to the ER. And I had to receive blood transfusions and a cocktail of different medications to help the bleeding stop.
Mhm.
So, long story short, eventually it did stop and I was able to like make it home to my baby and everything was like pretty normal. But I do think that experience made me very anxious that I had missed out on specific bonding with my baby during those first few days when, this was pulling us in different directions. And I was really fixated on the time about like not moving my baby to formula. So I was really like trying to pump and get the baby breast milk. And, you know, we had some like latch issues later. And I was worried that it was because of that week. So I pinned a lot on that week, and this
Mhm.
thing happening to me and that it was like, it would have this lifelong effect on my baby and my bond to my baby. So with my second pregnancy, I was very worried that this would happen again because it can, happen multiple times with, pregnant people. You can have postpartum hemorrhaging multiple times in a row. But I had switched doctors with my second pregnancy, and my second doctor was wonderful and really made me feel confident that, you know, it probably wouldn't happen again, but if it would, he would be ready for it. He's like, we're going to just prepare as if it's going to. And then if it doesn't, we're good. And it ended up not happening. My second pregnancy, my second birth was even faster than Eden's. Eden's from start to finish labor was like active labor, I think was like 12 hours. Active labor with Nina was only like 6 hours. It was wild. Also started with like a water break. Yeah. And literally, like, I did get an epidural also the second time around. And within like 20 minutes of the epidural, I was pushing and she was out, and it was wild.
Wild.
Yeah. And I didn't have I didn't have any hemorrhaging or anything after Nina, which was such a relief. Fun fact, I did end up having the same exact nurse at the hospital for both babies, and both were
Oh,
delivered in the same room. Both were 2 days after their due date that labor started spontaneously and they were born. So kind of crazy synchronicity with both of them. But yeah,
yeah.
long bird story kind of explanation. But I do like to share it because it's or at least in person when I've told people about that. In my experience of sharing, having gone through postpartum hemorrhaging, almost everyone I know has someone they know that had
Yeah.
that happen for them as well. So
Well, it's so scary. I mean, you
yeah.
have to like giving birth is still there's unfortunately the US still has a fairly high mortality rate for women who deliver. I think it's worse in underserved areas, but it's still definitely an issue. And unfortunately, it's worse for BIPOC people. Yeah, I mean, childbirth is gnarly.
It is gnarly. It was crazy. At one point, I think my hemoglobin level, I think a normal hemoglobin, am I saying that right? Hemoglobin
Mhm. Mhm.
level is like 12 or something.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mine was at a 5.
Yeah, that's pretty low. I mean, it's
So,
you lose a lot of blood. Like they don't tell you how much you bleed after pregnancy. Like you just don't expect it, but like you're in diapers or pads for a couple weeks after
yeah.
giving birth. And it gets better as it should over time, but
Yeah.
like yeah, I remember that was a really scary time. I feel like the timing between your cancer diagnosis and treatment and then your wedding and then you guys having Eden, like I remember feeling for Andrew because he was really such a champ. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it wasn't like there was any other option but for him to just be Eden's dad, but like so scary for him also to be there witnessing that happening to you after everything
Yeah.
else that you guys had gone through.
Well, and it was kind of crazy because it's like with my cancer diagnosis when I was going through it, like Andrew was in the hospital with me, for
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
When you have a baby, and it was sort of this representation where it was like he had to take care of the baby. So I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
good. I got this. Like, as long as I'm at the hospital, like you be strong for me and I'll be strong for you. And like we'll both be strong for our baby and like we'll just kind of figure this out. So I like even though I was like alone in the hospital, it's just really difficult. They did at one point like let him come and let me like nurse the baby a couple times, as a
Yeah.
visit, which is like a really big deal during COVID because, I was
It was the
being,
Wild West still. No one was
yeah,
letting anyone do
they were like
anything.
people, there are cancer patients dying in this wing and they are not allowed to see their family in their last
Mhm.
moments. They're like, that's how strict we have to be right now. And it's devastating. And they're like, so we're going to make an exception for your baby to come up here to see you because we want, like, these are kind of critical moments in like a maternal mental health,
Yeah.
point of view, which I felt really blessed that like a nurse saw that for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a crazy time to kind of go through all of that. But yeah, my husband was incredible through all of it. He really stepped up, and I do think that going through difficult things together adds significance to your relationship. And I think you and
Mhm.
I even we've talked about this with like our friendship. It's like bearing difficult things together, not fixing them necessarily, but just bearing them together.
Yeah.
It adds significance to your relationship. And I think that on a more macro level, like we felt that with our community. And that's part of our mission is like
Yeah.
bearing it together.
Yeah.
So
That's exactly, I mean, that's like the perfect translation for what I was trying to express earlier, even with miscarrying and with pregnancy loss, is just being able to share it with the community is so meaningful and healing.
Mhm.
Thankfully, I had a pretty good experience delivering Jude. It was a little wild because I have had the same OBGYN for since I was, in my late teens, Dr. Jay Goldberg, and he was just this incredible, like, had this very easygoing sense to him, but was also very informative. And like, he and I had just built like a really great rapport over the last 10 plus years. So he was with us through, all of my pregnancies, all of the losses, did a lot of like screening procedures on me when we were going through infertility. And, I had to have a couple like smaller surgeries, and he always presided over them. And so we were so excited when we were pregnant with Jude, but unfortunately, like exactly halfway through my pregnancy, week 20, Dr. Goldberg had a massive heart attack over Memorial Day weekend. Actually, it's coming up on a year of him not being here anymore. And so the community lost like a giant in the world of obstetrics and gynecology. He was like, such a fabulous teacher and such a staple in the community, and really strove to educate women, educate men, everything in between, to teach. And he was just like a really, really wonderful guy. So it was jarring because, we had this baseline level of anxiety through the pregnancy, and then to lose like the doctor you have so much
Mhm.
trust in was just devastating. Luckily, he worked in a practice who, despite the loss that they were all feeling, they did a great job of stepping up and trying to make sure all of the patients were taken care of. And they eventually hired somebody named Dr. Matt Guile, who actually knew Dr. Goldberg, and they were friends. And we ended up landing with him, not on purpose, actually. We were kind of like deer in the headlights, like trying to figure out who the new OB would be for like the second half of our pregnancy. And we thought it'd be one doctor who was fantastic, but then that doctor went on vacation. In the last like 2 months of my pregnancy, we just kept seeing Dr. Guile. And he was so informative and like so, for me, I really need like, I need somebody who will like just give me the facts, like tell
Mhm.
me the statistics, like shoot it to me straight. And with my autoimmune diagnosis, I have a lot of inflammation in my axial spine, specifically like in my pelvic area. And so one of the fears we had during pregnancy was we knew it was going to get worse when I was pregnant because of all the pressure and the stretching that happens as your baby gets bigger. And we weren't sure that I was going to be able to deliver vaginally, which for me, if I could do it, I really wanted to. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to, I mean, you get your baby here healthy in whatever way you have to, but the body is an incredible thing. And like by design, giving birth naturally, like there's literally like as the baby's coming out of the birth canal, it's like stimulating the baby's lungs so it's primed for the first breath. Like it's so a perfectly designed process.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like very meaningful, and it was something I really wanted if we could try it. And Dr. Guile was just like, he was so great about hearing the things that were important to me, giving birth naturally, like making sure that my birth was safe, like making sure if I, needed to have medications that I had access to them, but that I didn't necessarily want to just like throw the kitchen sink at like pain or discomfort. Like, but I wanted to be able to make those choices informed and, at the time, and not feel forced. And so I think I learned a lot from the people around me that had been pregnant. I learned a lot from you about, knowing what I wanted and taking my time and not feeling rushed. And so he was able to create that plan with me. And we ended up having to induce because my son dropped really low into my pelvis. My water never broke, oddly enough, because he was kind of like a plug. Like he was just like a wine cork and was
Yeah.
like just stuck there. But for like a month, he was down so low that we just kept thinking any second now my water is going to break. It started to get really, really uncomfortable. And so we actually had to induce because it started to get to a point where I like couldn't walk. and,
Yeah. He was
and
waddling
so
around.
Yeah, yeah. And so we induced and it was 2 weeks before his due date. And when they induce you, they hook you to an IV, they monitor your belly, and I just, for a while, like we did everything unmedicated, and I let like the contractions come for like two, because I was already contracting at that time too. It was like low
Yeah.
enough. It's just that my water hadn't broken. So I was contracting and I was in labor for about 13 hours before I was like, I'm really tired, but I was also so amped up that I couldn't fall asleep. And so I opted to have my water be broken. And shortly after my water was broken, I opted to get the epidural. And I told the doctors at the time, this was my one thing. I didn't really have a great experience with the epidural because I responded so quickly to the bullet, like the initial amount of medication that for like hours, like I could not move my lower body like
Mm.
at all, couldn't feel anything. And I think some women want that. But for me, if I don't move my body, everything starts like kind of locking up and getting painful. So after a couple hours, we had them shut it off. And like my body responded to that because things were moving a little bit slowly. And once they shut it off, I like finally fell asleep because I felt like I could like reposition myself. And then I woke up. Literally, we hit 24 hours of labor. I woke up like right after midnight, maybe like one, I think I woke up at like 1:15 and I was like something feels different. And we like looked at the monitor. I had been fully contracting like crazy the entire time. He had like all of a sudden descended like in that hour. I was fully dilated. And we paged the doctor and I had to actually like they were like, okay, you need to kind of like wait, like try not to push right now, like try to give your body some time because he was ready to go. The doctor got there like an hour later. They
Oh my
have to sleep.
gosh.
They have to
Yeah.
sleep at a certain point, so I like couldn't be upset and like things were bearable. He got there and we got ready, to push and I pushed for 30 minutes and baby was out. And we had music going and they had like the oil like, for the pelvic floor massage and everything.
Hmm.
And so like that part was a really good experience and I like went into a really intense place in my head because I was like, I'm just gonna like help this baby get out here and he did most of the work and now it's my turn. And I had a pretty good experience. The one thing that was really difficult was that my placenta. So I had a huge belly when I was pregnant and we thought the baby was going to be pretty big. Like my husband's 6'2", like his all of his nieces and nephews were like 8+ pounds. And so we were like, shoot, this is going to be a big baby. And when baby came out, he was like normal. He was 6 pounds, 14 ounces, and normal length. My placenta was gigantic. Like whatever cardio and strength training I was doing, the placenta was bigger than my child.
Live it to Quiche to be
Yeah,
like over providing, over nurturing, just like straight A student when it comes to taking care.
gigantic. But they actually, because of that, I had a really hard time with the afterbirth.
Mhm.
And I didn't really even know that this happened, but my doctor had to like manually help remove the placenta, which without like there's a high that you have when you're having your baby. And so you're like, you have all this adrenaline going, and like that part, it was painful, but it's also like euphoric in the sense that you're like,
Yeah,
my
I'm about to
baby's
meet my
here.
baby. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so like that's all bearable, but the placenta removal after was like horrible.
Yeah. Well,
It's horrible.
especially if you had kind of like been weaning off of the epidural. It's like you
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have
It
like
was totally gone. It was
that.
totally gone.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Poor
I
Kevin
did.
was
I know. You know what's so funny? I feel like there were some surprising things that were actually like, very helpful during birth that I didn't know would be as impactful. You were talking about like music, and I felt like music was like on a
Mhm.
spiritual level, like so there,
Mhm.
especially in the moment of birth. Like for both children, I have like imprinted on me like the songs that were playing when they were born.
What was
Um,
playing?
for Eden, there is a song from it's an Indian movie, the Bombay theme by I think it's A.R. Rahman. It's an Indian song with this beautiful like string version of this like I'll have to play it for you sometime. It's this
Okay.
beautiful, beautiful like Indian song, which was like so special in so many ways when Eden was born. Because also at that time, my OB was also Indian, so she recognized it and she was like, "Oh my God, like this is like a really like special Indian movie, you know, that it's
Mhm.
from." I had put together this like full playlist, and with Nina, it was a London Grammar song that I really love.
Aw.
So they both were really special, and like I felt like music really helped me through like the most intense parts of
Mhm.
labor. I also did not mention with Nina's birth, I hired a doula because at first I was like, oh, should I even hire another doula? Like my first one wasn't there, but I hired a really wonderful doula team, and that was delightfully helpful. Like I honestly will say like my birth of Nina was like really fast and furious, but like so enjoyable. Like she came, she met us at the hospital, and also she kind of guided me through. Like my water broke with Nina, but it wasn't as aggressive as with Eden. It was like you are in labor. With Nina, it was like I'm like it's broken, it's leaking. I'm like having like real mild contractions for a few hours. I'm like good, and I was texting her these things, and she's like,
Mhm.
stay at home, like have a nice breakfast with your daughter, and I went
Mhm.
for like a walk with my mom. And then we just like rolled up to the hospital and met up with her. And she did like essential oil massage on my ankles and like these different things to kind of get labor going and stuff.
Yeah.
She was just like such a wonderful guide through that whole process. Some people are like, oh, I have no interest in having a doula. But like if you are a person that thinks you might benefit from another layer of support, I have nothing but good things to say about great doulas in the space. I will say that I felt particularly empowered by my doulas because I expressed strongly that I was like, I hemorrhaged my first birth. I will be giving birth in a hospital. I'm like,
Mhm.
no doubt about it. That is the only way I will relax enough to like have a baby again. And she so respected that. I was like, and
Yeah.
I want to kind of like, I do want to feel my contractions and like feel what birth feels like and everything. But I'm like, but I also want someone that like can respect if like what I need some medical intervention or if like I want someone that's going to be with me when I'm making choices. And she's like, that's my whole job is to like give you the birth that you want.
Yeah.
She's like,
And I love that because I think the whole idea, I think like the whole overarching theme of motherhood, like the whole thing about unsolicited advice or like what the right things to say are, is like really giving somebody the freedom to make their own decisions and
yeah,
choices, and just like being able to trust in yourself and your intuition to make those choices as they come.
yes,
And I think like it was always really significant to me because I remember you obviously had Eden and Nina before I gave birth to Jude. And just the experience of being your friend and watching you walk through it with such grace and saying, like, I'm going to try really hard to take these things as they come. As much as you want to control a situation, um, you were very adamant about it and you really lived that. And I mean, it gave me a lot of strength to follow suit when I had my baby. And so that was like a great example that you gave me.
well, that means a lot to me. But yeah, I do think that like those little things that helped. Yeah, you just feel this extra sense of intuition. I think when you're pregnant, which felt like a gift. But I think that approaching it like I'm going to just be moment to moment here, and like whatever happens, like I trust in myself to make the choices from that will be best for me and for my baby. And I think that that had a really great outcome in both settings, even with like the trauma of what happened after Eden's birth. I do
Yeah.
think that like that feeling around birth is was really special and very fortunate to have had that kind of
Yeah.
take on birth. And I think you were too.
Yeah, I think it matters a lot. I think that's what gave me a lot of peace giving birth to Jude, because like there was so much anxiety not having my original OB there. Having the fear consistently throughout pregnancy that you know, it wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to get to bring my baby home. That like, all of these things cross your mind constantly. Especially, for me, like I had all of that anxiety was deeply rooted in the trauma of losing, multiple pregnancies. You just don't, you, I started to believe, I was like, well, like it's just not going to happen. And so it wasn't until like my son was on my chest And then like we were bringing him home, and then like we are staring at him in bed like the first night, like, is he okay? That it like really starts to sink in, like, no. And even now I'll like look at my baby and be like, I can't believe that every choice we made has brought us here, and some things that were out of our control. But yeah,
Just so
being a
special.
mommy is wild. And
It
then
is
hearing
so
him
fun.
save mama today.
I know, the best. One resource that I wanted to make sure we brought up in this conversation around like birth too. I think that even in movies and stuff, like birth is such an event,
Hmm.
and I think that in the movies, it's like there are some issues with like some of the ways it's portrayed where it's like everyone said it's like your water breaks. And then you think that for everyone, your water breaks like that. And then you're screaming in labor and the
Yeah.
baby comes. I'm like, I don't think I screamed at all during my
Yeah.
labor. Like
I
I
didn't
maybe
scream
maybe
either.
kind of whined a little bit from the pain, like kind of just
Yeah.
pathetically, but there was definitely no screaming. I didn't have the energy for that, but like, there's this like TV version of birth that's not really accurate in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
But then I think that not a lot of people talk about postpartum and like, experience like breastfeeding and how much of a learning curve that can have for, it's sometimes I think some people have an easier time just like establishing breastfeeding, but if you have any latch issues and stuff, it can be really, really difficult,
Hmm.
physically and emotionally. But I wanted to share that like there are most insurances will cover visits from a lactation consultant.
Hmm.
In my experience, I think it was like 10 visits that were covered in my home. She came to my
Yeah.
home and helped me with Nina's latch, which had some difficulty. And I didn't know that resource was there when I was breastfeeding Eden. And I wish I would have because, there were things that could have been kind of fixed with the way I was breastfeeding Eden that we did address when I was breastfeeding Nina. So that is something like to not shy away from finding a lactation consultant. It's called IBCLC is the acronym for a
Yeah.
internationally certified like lactation consultant, but they are wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful, and available to you.
There's actually, I know one of the things we definitely wanted to talk about was breastfeeding, but I I think it would go into like a whole other hour, but I think we'll definitely link. ILBC is a great one. La Leche League is a nonprofit that is specifically for women who are breastfeeding. And they have a lot of resources as well for women who choose not to or who can't breastfeed. A lot of resources for like breast milk donation, etc., things like that, information about formulas. And then there's a company called My Nursing Coach, so we can link all of that because that's a very significant part of the journey that I think we'll hopefully get to talk about in one of our future episodes.
Eventually, we're probably going to have to like face the
Yeah.
transition of like meeting our babies again and
Yeah.
that whole experience. Maybe around that time we can time in an episode on that. But yeah, so this has been quite a duo of episodes. I know it's like sometimes I feel like we're sharing like all these details of like birth and stuff. Sometimes half of me is like, who would even care? And then half of me is like, oh my God, these are so many graphic
Yeah.
details.
Yeah.
But then also I'm like, I don't know. I've never heard anyone's birth story and been like, oh, I don't want to hear this. And like, I don't know. I think it's fascinating,
Well, I
and then
think
it can happen
before
so
I
many
had
different
a baby
ways.
too. I mean, you
Yeah.
just don't know what to expect except what you see on TV, and those things
Yeah.
are just so not real. And so hopefully this episode was as meaningful for you as it was for us to record. And
I feel like some people are like, oh, like people share these like gnarly birth stories and stuff. And like I think the takeaway for both of us when we share birth stories and everything is that like at the end of the day, like regardless of like how birth goes, I am so proud of myself for every part of my pregnancy experience and birth experience. And I'm simultaneously so proud of all women, straight up.
mm-hmm.
Like now, I feel like having gone through birth, like I'll have this like crazy moments in like the grocery store. I'm like, wow, that mom has like 3 kids like hanging off her grocery cart. She gave birth to all 3 of those kids. She's taking care of them. She's fed them, you know, and I just have so much respect for like all women and mothers everywhere. So I
And
love you
our
guys.
moms. Yeah.
And
I
especially
love you,
my
mom.
Kishi
Shout out
girl.
and especially you, Asha. Shout out to our moms
Shout out to our moms,
and
our
all
own
the moms
moms,
I
and all the
know.
moms going. All right. With that, we love you guys. We will see you again next week